and created this exclusive distributorship concept, which ultimately led to them both having their own independent, very large companies. Carl's company, Nutrilite Products, would sell his vitamins exclusively to Mightier and Castleberry. Mightier and Castleberry would buy their products exclusively from Nutrilite.
It was perfect for Carl. Now he merely needed to send them product. He didn't have to focus on sales anymore. He could create. He could try to perfect his concepts, which was what he truly loved. But more importantly, he could focus on a new woman he had met. Her name was Edith Bruck. He fell for her immediately. In late 1946, they were married.
Edith was Carl's perfect partner in a personal relationship. She had things that he must have needed very strongly, and he was passionate about her. He loved her.
Edith believed in what Carl was doing. She had a sharp business acumen and immediately recognized that Carl had a great product and a great name in Nutrilite. And now he had a sales process that was working. Mightinger and Castleberry were getting Nutrilite sold in record amounts. To keep up with demand, the family moved to a farm near Buena Park, California. The Renborgs put up a production center there. It was nothing fancy. In fact, their new home was a Quonset hut on the property. In 1947, sales topped $2 million. Distributors were highly motivated because the more they sold, the higher they rose in the organization. In 1948, sales hit $4.5 million. Distributors were popping up all across the country. Two of the most successful were a couple of guys in their early 20s, operating out of Michigan, Jay Van Andel and Rich DeVos.
Well, the sales technique played right into our hands, so to speak, because the emphasis of it was own your own business. You're not just a distributor for Nutrilite. You were an owner of your own distribution network. There were no limits on it. There were no territorial restrictions upon us. You could make as much as you could. The more you brought in, the more you made.
This was the heyday of Nutrilite. I mean, sales were going up 100% a year. And we had big TV programs. We sponsored the Dennis Day Show, which was about as big as Jack Benny was in those days, and great ads in Life magazine, Post magazine. And it was a glorious time.
For 60-year-old Carl, it was sweet vindication for decades of hard work and quiet ridicule. He bought a boat and that dreamer's house he once told his son about near Newport Beach. Competitors like One A Day entered the market, but none offered the range of vitamin, mineral, and plant substances that Nutrilite did. In fact, few scientists of the time even studied those plant substances, which are today known as phytochemicals and considered vital to health.
Remember that when he came out with the Nutrilite supplements, there was no vitamin industry. So he is the father of vitamin industry. He concentrated not only on what people knew about vitamins or the so-called factory, but he understood the importance of taking a plant and making an extract, recognizing that there are substances in the extracts that we never know what they do until years later.
Carl's vision of the importance of nutrition was just staggering because it was so strange to the thinking. The feeling up until that point, when he started, was that eat 3 square meals a day and you're okay. When Renborg began, very few vitamins were even known. And so he started putting together a natural food product in the alfalfa, one of the richest known sources of natural food that you can find. And the research in the whole world began to follow behind that.
Carl's innovative spirit had not waned. Even though Nutrilite was now a terrific success, he was still doing research in his lab. He discovered a cherry, the acerola cherry, which has high concentrates of vitamin C and is loaded with phytochemicals. And he learned that Egyptian earthworms could aerate the soil better, so he imported them. Meanwhile, to meet the demand for Nutrilite, Carl had to grow more alfalfa. He added a farm in Hemet, California, then another in Lakeview. As he bought up the property, he kept the existing farm employees. One was Frank Cerna, who ended up giving tours of the farm.
We're going to go from here over to the pest break and then to the echinacea.
Cerna remembers how human Carl was.
He had a terrific memory, could memorize everyone's name, knew where they were working, what their job responsibility was.
He had a kind of intensity of focus that made people feel like not just that they were the center of attention, but they related with him.
Carl truly wanted to listen. Periodically, he would gather all the employees around a pepper tree on the farm, where they would sit for hours and discuss whatever the workers were thinking about, from religion to sports to family.
He was interested in everybody, so everybody who came into contact with him was the most interesting and fascinating person he'd ever met. And that's a real gift.
Frank Cerna remembers that Carl would pull him away from his work to gaze with him through his telescope.
He said, "Frank, come and look at this." And I said, "I really have several water lines to move." And he said, "Oh, but you must see this. I tell you what," he said, "I'll help you move those sprinkler lines. If you would just come over here and I'll show you some of what is happening out today in the stars." So I did. I spent quite more time than I had intended to, and he introduced me to some of the constellations, and we got quite late at night, and then he said, "Okay, now it's time for us to go move the sprinklers."
When it came to running the business, most workers had no doubt who was boss. It was Edith.
Someone that wasn't dressed properly or behaving properly, she would just, "You're out of here." She was a taskmaster.
But then Grandpa would come walking through and tell everybody, "You're not really fired. Go back to work."
But the good times of growth would not last. Ambition got in the way. Meitinger and Castleberry began distributing sales material which claimed that Nutrilite virtually cured disease.
As sales guys are prone to do, they kept coming with more exotic techniques, and finally they had a couple of brochures that my father was not very happy with, and one of them was called, How to Get Well and Stay Well. Actually, it was How to Cheat Death was the first version.
The curative claims were a gross distortion of the health benefits Carl had designed Nutrilite to address, bringing nutrition into balance. Carl was furious about it. And so was the FDA, which slapped them with a lawsuit. Carl hired lawyer Charles Rhine to fight the case. During the course of it, Carl impressed Rhine with his powerful mind.
There are some people who are very, very unusual in this world, and he was one of them. It's hard to give an adequate illustration except to say that when he got through with me on dissecting some legal problem that I was up against, he knew more about it than I did.
Charles Rhine would go on to become a very prominent lawyer. In the course of his life, he met dozens of world leaders, and he judged Karl Renborg to be just as impressive.
He was a very powerful man. He's a man who, when he says something, he reminds me very much of Churchill.
But as the FDA case dragged on, sales suffered.
Well, everything sort of stopped. Whenever there's a war like that going on, everybody stands around and watches. And so it was hard to recruit people because it would give in the paper that there was a lawsuit going against them and so forth.
Charles Rhine and Karl Renborg put up a relentless fight, taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. Their arguments were so convincing that in 1953 the FDA finally settled. As part of that settlement, there was a consent decree saying what could and could not be said about Nutrilite when selling it. The settlement worked to the company's benefit because it was able to use the consent decree itself as a sales tool. It was information that was government approved. But the scare got everyone thinking about what might happen if Nutrilite were ever threatened again.
My father said, well, maybe we ought to be looking at some other products. And for many years, he had been making cosmetic creams for my mother based upon his natural plant materials.
The Edith Renborg Cosmetics line grew out of Nutrilite because it was developed as a natural form of cosmetics. All the bases and all the ingredients were some kind of natural product.
When Carl approached Meitinger and Castleberry about distribution of the cosmetic line, there was conflict.
Meitinger and Castleberry wanted to sell them at a high price point, at $20 per month per product. But, you know, a woman would look at that and say, well, I can't afford to do this.
Cosmetics was really the straw that broke the back between the two companies.